Okay, welcome to Monmouth Battlefield. I'm Dr. David Martin, the president of the Friends of the Battlefield. We are a volunteer group that support the park by co-sponsoring the battle reenactment every year. It's in the middle of June. By doing tours of the battlefield the first Sunday every month and sometime another one. And by sponsoring what is appropriately called the Second Sunday Lecture Series, which happens the second Sunday every month. We also help interpret the Craig House over on Route 9 because the park does not have enough staff to do that. The park only has like 6 or 7 full-times and several seasonals. They are understaffed. This is a state park. We are multi-purpose. There's picnicking, there's hiking, there's bird watching, there's tree hugging. But the main reason we're here is because of Battle of Monmouth fought here on June 28, 1778. We do also have Native American remains around from the Lenni Lenape Indians, a branch of the Delawares, and there was also a Civil War training camp here located within the park in 1862 to 64. That'll be the topic of my next talk, second Sunday in December. On the 28th, New Jersey, the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 1862. That regiment trained here, and there'll be Civil War related. My last talk last month was on burial of the dead and treatment of the wounded. It was a popular talk, except there was like a storm coming through that day and not everybody was able to come. That's sorry for that, and nor did we get it recorded. By the way, all the talks we are recording. If you can't hear me, let me know. I tend to wander, but that's mainly that we get the video and some sound on that. So fortunately, the burial of the dead and treatment of the wounded talk, I will be redoing next year. This is the 23rd in this series of Second Sunday lectures. I just got the contract renewed and we'll do 12 more next year. Some of them will be new. They'll be listed in the new newsletter at friendsofmonmouth.org when I get it out. There's some new topics for next year, but also we'll be giving a series of lectures for the Monmouth County Library System. And if you missed, the information will be in the newsletter. If you missed the talk last month because of the weather, the burial of the dead, treatment of the wounded will be given at the Eastern Branch of Monmouth County Library in October of next year. I'm getting booked up. I have almost 20 lectures booked for next year already. It's Revolution time. That's great. That's when we get our focus of attention. And I'll list in the newsletter at some point those events. So anyway, that's the background on the Friends. You're looking at the actual battlefield out here. We're on the southern edge of it. As you look at it, this park is 50 years old. There were, at the time of the battle, less trees. All these damn trees grew up since we put up the park. You used to be able to see the whole battlefield. That's why I like the fall after the leaves come down, because you can see the darn battlefield. The center of the fight is off that way, half a mile, the hedgerow, which changed hands 7 times during the course of the battle. So that's really the center of the battle. And you can see, or at least not on a foggy day, the Sutphin House is exactly a mile north of here, was the center of the fighting in the afternoon of the battle. It's one of 6 remaining buildings in the area that were here in 1778. As you look at the field, again, there would have been less trees. We're working on chopping them down. They cost $2,000 to $3,000 a piece to chop them down, but we want to have a good view shed so that when we do our big 250th reenactment in 28, coming up in 2.5 years now, you'll be able to see, because the fighting will come from Oakneck Hill over to here. See down there, again, at colonial times.
Binoculars back then.
Excuse me?
Did they have binoculars back then?
Yes, spy glasses, I call them that. War pirate type spy glasses, yes. There have been less trees and more fences. But other than that, there's lots of fields down there, just as there would have been then, because the state leases the land out to local farmers to keep it occupied. We are damn lucky to be having this park in that in the 1970, somebody got the idea to build a mall here. And when they built Route 33 out there, which is why it's 4-lane with a median, and they built a big water treatment plant over on the edge of what's now the park, they were going to put a mall here, and if they had come through with that plan, you'd be right now in the middle of the parking lot for Monmouth Battlefield Mall, which is almost a sin to put a mall right on top of a battlefield. Fortunately, the state stepped in, bought several farms in this area, and the park opened in June of 1978, and I was here, and the mall builders went a couple miles down the road, and that's why we have Freehold Raceway Mall, because they had a raceway that they weren't using right there at the time. So I guess win-win for everybody. Speaking of win, I think, if you've been reading our newsletter and following the news, we have brought an end to a warehouse that they were trying to build right across from the entrance to the park. I went there with Michael Timpanero, the historian, to the commission hearings to try and block it, that this is historic ground in this area, and the traffic in the whole area. It's on hold right now, but hopefully that has come to an end, and we are trying to acquire that property to add it to the park. So there's enough warehouses around in central New Jersey already, but hopefully that will clear up. Okay, so let me lapse into the talk, and actually that reminds me, I will silence my phone. I promise to silence yours. And I have my phone story. I was giving a lecture at Valley Forge once, and the phone started humming, and I shut it off. And next thing I know, my friend Lenny in the front row, his phone was running because Sandy was trying to get a hold of me. And she was trying to call me during my talk like usual, so she couldn't reach me, so she called my friend. So thank you for silencing your phones. The talk today is famous British units. Now, this is a new one for me. I am throwing in this year some new talks, and I will be putting even more talks in next year. As a military historian, I need to note that we spend a lot of time looking at what famous people did. I'm going to give a nice lecture on George Washington minute by minute. I'll be giving one next year on what Alexander Hamilton and what Anthony Wayne were doing here. And you follow the generals, because they're the ones making the decisions that affect the course of the battle. As you do the research or write up the histories, you can also pick up private accounts, although not as many for Revolution battles as in Civil War battles. Joseph Plum Martin was a soldier from Connecticut, has the best diary, I think, for the whole war. He was here at Monmouth, and he has important evidence on where George Washington was, where Molly Pitcher was, and what was going on. We have it for sale in the gift shop. But we spend a lot of time talking about the generals and about the privates. We don't talk about the units. Now, I will admit that I am not as up on unit histories for the Revolution as I am with the Civil War. Not to be immodest, I'm the co-author of a book called Regimental Strengths and Losses at Gettysburg that I published like 40 years ago, which is still the reference book on what units were actually at Gettysburg, more so what parts of units, because each regiment had 10 companies, and a lot of the regiments didn't have all their companies because they never raised them in the first place, or they were off doing something else. So I am, up on Civil War units, not so much on Rev War units. It's something that this helped me get used to, especially British Rev War units. And don't start asking me about uniform colors. Okay, they will have their basic red uniform, and then they have what's called facings, which is the cuffs and the collar and the line here. And whatever unit you're in might have a blue facing or a tan facing. And that's interesting because each regiment is proud of, that's how they tell the regiments apart. The redcoats, yes, and they have the facings will tell you what unit you're looking at. I am not master of that yet. I can work on it, but I'm not there yet. What's interesting is with these facings is that the musicians, and each regiment had musicians with them, would have reverse facings. So you're in a British unit that has red uniforms with blue facings. The musicians are going to be blue uniforms with red facings, which looks a lot like the colonial uniforms. And the other way around, the colonials are also doing that. Their standard color is blue, usually with a tan facing, but usually it's blue, sometimes with a red facing. So if you get a colonial musician, they're going to have a red uniform with blue facings that looks British. Okay, so they may have problems, figuring out who's who, just as at the Battle of First Bull Run in the Civil War. There were troops on each side that wore blue uniforms, gray uniforms, green uniforms, and tan uniforms. And that played an important part of the battle at one point when somebody didn't shoot at a regiment they should have because they were in the wrong color uniform, as far as we're concerned. So I'm not up on uniforms. We do have a little bit of exhibit out there. There are books on these things available. Okay, so what got me going into this digression is that we spend time looking at what generals are doing. We spend some time looking at what privates are doing. At least for the Revolution, it's hard to see what units are doing what. And you have to remember that units are not people. They're artificial creations. When I say the 2nd Battalion of the British Grenadiers is doing this, what I mean is the 500 men that compose the 2nd Battalion of British Grenadiers is doing that. The unit is not a person. It's like a corporation in America. It does have legal rights sometimes, can pay taxes and that, but it's a bunch of people. It's not an official organization. But as a military historian, I get too involved in doing that. My favorite regiment growing up was the 24th Michigan because I came from Michigan. Again, it fought throughout the war, but it's not a living person. It was a group of people fighting through. So keep that in mind as we go through. I'm not dealing today with American units in the battle. Maybe I'll bring that in another year. It's harder to follow the battle with American units because they had you've heard how the Army retrained at Valley Forge before Monmouth, and they actually did, but be aware that they weren't training green troops at Valley Forge. These were the experienced troops that had been fighting. They rearranged how they lined up and the orders they followed. And one of the processes they did there under General von Steuben, whose statue stands out beside this museum, is to be able to all drill together. Different states or different regiments had different forms of drill and orders. And it was hard for them to work together in battle when, if you're from Connecticut, you're next door to a unit from Virginia, and you have different commands. So von Steuben standardized the commands for veteran troops. And one of the outcomes of that was you're able to take 10 men from the 1st New Jersey and 10 men from the 3rd Virginia, and they can line up together and hear the same commands because von Steuben standardized them. And they will end up with what's called being able to use picked men. Now, picked men means every American regiment gave their 20 best men into the central command, and those were going around, especially in the morning, but also late in the afternoon, fighting as ad hoc or temporary units. So it's a lot harder to follow what's going on with American units because their men are all split up, including Plummartin will serve with his unit from Connecticut for half of the battle. He'll be in the picked men for the rest of the battle. Now that's maybe more than what you need to know, but just let you know that these things are out there and things that we historians do consider. Now, what I want to do is focus on just a handful of British troops here, some of which you've probably heard of before. The Black Watch? Yeah, I've heard of them. Grenadiers? Yeah, I've heard of them. Dragoons, you may not have, they're mounted infantry. And the British Guards has a nice history. So as I go through each of these units, I will be doing a little bit of unit history on what they did before the war and after the war, but the main function is to see what they did here in the battle itself. Now, I don't know if anybody's here because you're British or have British interest or ancestry. Okay, so I won't be offending anybody. Okay, so let's look at the Black Watch. Black Watch is a Scottish unit. Notice I don't say Scotch because Scotch is a drink and the Scottish people hate it when you call them Scotch. Okay. They dated to around 1725 as an organization, was formed in Scotland from local companies that were trustworthy or loyal to the king. And their early members were all gentlemen of higher rank. They were literally watchers because they watched their neighbors who might not be loyal to the king. I'm not quite sure where the word black came in. They might have had dark uniforms, or they had a bad mood and were called black, but they soon became known as the Black Watch and will be here also the 42nd Regiment of the Line in the British County. Their uniform is a scarlet jacket and a plaid tartan. They did have kilts at one point. And some of the books I'm looking at are claiming they still have kilts, Scottish short pants, or short skirts, excuse me. But I think they were more wearing like Bermuda shorts with still their tartan color on it. It was a distinctive uniform, and these uniforms would be unique to each unit to build up morale. They fought in America during the French and Indian War, and had a lot of losses at Ticonderoga. If you ever get a chance to go up to Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York, it is cool to be there. I'm just past Albany. It's a French-style fort, of European style. That and Fort Niagara over near Niagara Falls are really cool to visit if you're into a military history and like to see stuff like that. They had a big loss there, and end up back here in the time of the Revolution in 1776. Most of these famous regiments will be here from 1776. Some of them were also at Bunker Hill in 75. But the British got a slap in the face when they could not hold on to Boston. Boston was where all the trouble started. They shut down the port of Boston, they occupied the town, and then we made two smart moves to stop them. One was to put George Washington in charge of the armies. And those of you who heard me talk before are aware of that. Why they did that? Because he's had a lot of experience as Colonel of Virginia militia. He's also 6 foot tall and wearing his uniform to the Continental Congress, got himself appointed. But there's two reasons why Congress will appoint him. One is that he offered to serve without pay, although his expense accounts ended up being more than what his pay would have been. And secondly, they wanted it to be a united colony effort, and Virginia was the biggest colony. And John Hancock wanted to be head of the American Army. Well, he's from Boston. If John Hancock had been appointed, he was the head of the Massachusetts militia, by the way, been appointed head of the American Army, it would have remained a New England Revolution. But by putting Washington in charge, it became a colony revolution. So those two events helped him there. And he got Henry Knox to take cannons from Ticonderoga when he captured it by Ethan Allen, hauled them over to Boston on sleds through the snow, which was quite a feat, and chased the British out of Boston. So the British went home and they came back in force. They will capture New York City in 1776. Well, we're writing this Declaration of Independence and celebrating it next year, and we'll have a big celebration here at Monmouth also on July 4 of next year. The British were capturing New York, and then they went down and captured Philadelphia, our capital. By European standards, if you lose your capital, you should lose the war. We didn't. Again, one of my favorite phrases, we were too dumb to realize that, and Congress backed off and moved to York, Pennsylvania, and the war went on. So the 42nd was there. Now, before I go much farther, I want to talk about how British regiments, line regiments, were set up. In those days, regiments would have, and the regiment averaged, we're going to be 400 men, 10 companies. So do your math. A company would be 1/10 of 400, whatever that is. And each of the regiments would have 8 line companies and 1 company of light infantry. Light infantry would have less packs, a different kind of musket, and they'd be able to maneuver more. You use them as skirmishers and scouts. The more the British fought in America, and one trouble they had with America, it's so big and there's trees all over the place. So the light infantry got to be more important. But each regiment had 1 company of light infantry and 1 company of heavy infantry. The heavy infantry were big guys, 5'10" or bigger, and they threw grenades because they invented hand grenades back in the 1600s. So they are called Grenadiers. And this will come in when I talk about the Grenadiers regiments. So basically, again, each regiment had 10 companies. One's in light infantry, one's in heavy infantry or Grenadiers. By the time of Monmouth, they put all the light infantry into separate regiments and all the Grenadiers into separate regiments. So your line regiments only have 8 companies to them. It's probably more than you need to know, but that's what we're working on. So anyway, what did the 42nd do here at Monmouth? They had over 600 men, one of the bigger British units in the battle. And they will be involved in the morning action. Now, when you look at Monmouth on June 28, 1778, it runs, I used to say like a chess match, but more like a checkers match. It's going on all day. It's not a short action like Princeton, which will be half an hour. Battle of Trenton wasn't much longer because there weren't a lot of troops involved. There's not a lot of maneuvering involved once they all get together. The other problem is their weapons don't shoot very far. The muskets will shoot 50 or 60 yards. That's why, if you come to the reenactment and you're up here on Coombs's Hill, where there were American group troops and cannons during the battle, and the British are over on the next ridge in their red uniforms, you can see them, but you can't hit them with your muskets, because it's more than 50 yards away. Their cannons can only shoot half a mile or so. Okay, so our cannons could hit guys on the next ridge, but not 2 ridges over. So the ranges are limited, and that limits the length of the battles. Monmouth is fought in terms of maybe 6 or 7 different separate actions during the course of the day, and it's too complicated here to explain what was going on in much of the morning. Okay, this is the last one, Molly. Can you go to sleep now? Okay. But in the actions here, there was fighting at the middle of the battlefield from 7 to 9 in the morning. Then it flowed into Monmouth Courthouse, a couple miles that way, and then it came back to here, and in the afternoon, they're going to be on Perrine Ridge, which is way in the background here, where Molly Pitcher was. When the American forces in the morning got defeated and were chased back into the park area, by the way, the park distance covers the central part of the battlefield and the northern part. We can't do the eastern part because the town's on top of it. At the time of the battle, there were maybe 40 houses and 3 churches in town. It was much smaller then. The 42nd followed the Americans back closely, and their route will be about half a mile north of here, or north of Route 522. And what will happen is, with the 42nd, let me get the right map here. Okay, that's Grenadiers, that's Grenadiers, that's Grenadiers. Okay, we want to look at the map that says 321 on it. On the map that says 321, the Black Watch is in the 3rd Brigade, and as they move forward, they occupy a orchard, and there where it says 3rd Brigade up at the top of map 321, that is the Black Watch there. They advance past the orchard towards the American lines, and the American lines in the afternoon were pretty solid. That's why George Washington stayed on the field. And they were up on the hill, which is the Perrine Hill that you can see in the background, and you can't really see because of the trees right now where Sutton House is, but the orchard there is right there. By the way, Molly Pitcher's cannon is the top one over there near where it says Perrine's Hill, which is going to be shooting at the 3rd Brigade and the Black Watch. Now, we have from Plum Martin, who I mentioned as the best private account in the war, an account, he was there at 3 in the afternoon when the Black Watch was maneuvering up on that orchard. And he wrote, before the cannonade commenced, a part of the right wing of the British Army advanced across the low meadow and a brook and occupied an orchard on our left. Okay, this is one of our best, again, private accounts of the battle. Our other great primary sources are General Washington's account of the battle, a report on the battle, which was written by Alexander Hamilton, by the way, and the papers of the General Charles Lee court-martial. One of the top American commanders will be court-martialed for his role in the battle, and that trial transcript has been preserved. Plum Martin is saying the weather was almost too hot to live in. The British troops advanced in the orchard, were forced by the heat to shelter themselves under the trees. Okay, American troops, when it's hot, take their jackets off, or go hide in the woods, or go get some water. British troops, you take your jacket off, you're going to get fined. I don't care if you win or lose the battle. Your company commander is going to fine you because those jackets are technically government issue and you can't discard them. So imagine wearing those heavy wool uniforms with the bright red on it that are dark through a hot day. Now, it's not 100 degrees here. You read the account, says 100 degrees here. Doesn't get 100 degrees in New Jersey very often. It's probably 90 degrees and humid, but it's still very nasty, and there were troops that did die of heat exhaustion. So the British are sheltering themselves under the trees to get away from the heat. We had a 4-pounder on the left of our pieces, which kept up a constant fire on the enemy during the whole fight. That's Molly Pitcher's cannon. After the British artillery had fallen back and the cannonade had ceased in this area, our detachment had an opportunity to look around, and the colonel came by and said, "Here you are the boys I want to assist in driving those rascals out of yon orchard." We instantly marched towards the enemy's right wing, again, which is the top right of the map 321, which was in the orchard, and kept concealed from them as long as possible. The British immediately formed and began to retreat. Colonel Silly ordered 3 or 4 platoons from our right of our group to attack them. I was in the party. We pursued them without order. As I passed through the orchard, I saw a number of the enemy lying under the trees, killed by our cannons. This is the first time in the war that the American troops had defeated a crack British unit in open battle. And for them to see Black Watch guys dead in this orchard was quite a thrill for the Americans. They pursued them back. If we look at map number 334, is a sort of a continuation of that, a bit larger scale. Up in the middle of the map, near where it says Silly and Parker, you might see something in fine print there. It says Proctor's 4-pounder. That's Molly Pitcher. The 42nd is the Black Watch. You can see them there in the orchard. And actually, archaeologists have gone in there and dug up grape shot and cannonballs and even musket balls that hit trees in that orchard. It's no longer there. And then the 42nd and all the troops that were north of Route 522 retreated in that line you see going down to the lower right. So that is the function of the Black Watch in the battle. They held an advanced British position on the north side of the field in an orchard. They did not attack the Americans head on. The British found out the hard way at Bunker Hill in 1775. Americans are good defenders. It took them like 5 charges to carry Bunker Hill, which we all know as good historians who fought on Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill. And their heaviest losses in a battle were at Bunker Hill, so they would not attack the Americans head on. That's why the 42nd Regiment, even though it's a crack regiment, in a good position there, right in front of a strong American position, on a hill with cannons on it, did not attack it. They knew they would have trouble. So what do they do? Okay, the British generals developed a battle strategy that they used successfully a couple times earlier in the war. Battle of Long Island, you line your troops up facing Washington, you shoot your cannons to keep you busy, and you send troops around you. It worked at Long Island. It will work at the Battle of Brandywine. What's going to happen here at Monmouth, instead of attacking that heavy American position there, they're going to send some troops down to the southern end of the battlefield to this area. Now we have a home field advantage in that some of the militia officers live here and warned General Washington, sir, there's a hill down there you really ought to occupy before the British get here. So Washington sent 600 Virginians under General Woodford and 4 cannons to this hill, and we occupied it before the British could get here, and a left hook by the British didn't work, so what they do, they try a right hook. And they sent 1 battalion, actually the 2nd Battalion of the 42nd Regiment, up on Craig Road, if you know the area, just north of where the park is, to try and get around the American left. That didn't work either. Washington had thought they might do that. He sent General Lafayette with some troops over near Tennant Church, and he stopped them. So the British then decided not to play anymore. They wouldn't attack our center. Their left hook didn't work. Their right hook didn't hurt, so they withdrew. And the 42nd was involved in that. A little bit of later history, and it's interesting, when I was writing my book on the battle, I traced some of these regiments, and most of what their regiments talk about is getting clobbered literally in World War I. Because they're still around today, they have a history. The Black Watch fought in the Crimean War, it fought in Africa in the Zulu Wars. It was really beat up in World War I. They were at Tobruk and D-Day in World War II, in Korea in 1952, Northern Ireland, and they're still around today. So the Black Watch is still one of the noble British regiments, and it fought here in the Revolution. It did more at some of the other battles. It was here, that's what they did. And I can't apologize for that, but that's the way it works. It's like when I do my talk on the New Jersey regiments in the battle. New Jersey regiments didn't do too well in this battle, but we have to analyze and respect what happened. Okay, now, as a sidelight before I get going on the Grenadiers, Dragoons. Dragoons are mounted infantry. Okay, they can move quickly. They have a little bit shorter muskets to be easier to fire. They're used for scouting and holding the sides of a line. They also had smaller horses than regular cavalry. Okay, the 16th Dragoon, also known as the Queen's Own Dragoons or the Queen's Lancers, were here in fighting in America since 1776. They were here at Monmouth and later were actually at Waterloo. If you've seen the movie Waterloo, which is pretty good, there's a great cavalry charge during the course of the battle, and the 16th Dragoons were involved in that. At the time of Monmouth, they had around 350 men. What's interesting is in the morning, in the action in the morning, about the only success we had at mid-morning was that American commander of some picked men, Colonel Butler, sent some men out to where the Dragoons were, and then they ran away under orders. And the Dragoons said, "Oh, we're winning," and they chased these American troops under Butler back, and then got ambushed, and they got clobbered. You don't expect the British troops to be that foolhardy, but they thought they had the battle won even at that point. And they will get chased back to their own lines, where they ran through their own lines and disordered them. It's hard to figure out from the British side what happened here, because they don't want to admit they lost that part of the battle. But Colonel Butler wrote it up. What's interesting is Colonel David Ray of the Americans, who lived locally, was being chased by some British Dragoons on horseback, and he ran around a barn, and the British chased him around the barn. He actually rode his horse through the barn and out the other door, and everybody thought that was the greatest thing. It's one of the great folklore stories of the battle on how Colonel Ray escaped the Dragoons. Now, they will be with the main British force under General Cornwallis. If you go to map 301 on the first page, after the Americans lost the morning battle in Monmouth Courthouse, they withdraw back to the area of the park, and they're followed closely on the southern part of the battlefield. Remember, in the northern part was where the Black Watch was, and they had a whole separate engagement by the Dragoons and the Guards and the Grenadiers. We'll be talking about the Guards and the Grenadiers in a moment. But you can see lower right, the 16th Light Dragoons, the guys on horseback. The British were following the Americans back and didn't pay any attention to their right wing, where there's a bunch of woods that we call Point of Woods, where General Washington set up Mad Anthony Wayne with some troops to ambush the British. And they held their fire until the British were right on top of them, and then opened fire on them. And the British charged back with bayonets into that woods, and it's the only place in the whole battle, this is by the Grenadiers and the Guards, that there was actually hand-to-hand fighting. Most of the casualties in this battle are caused by cannon fire, because they shoot farther. Okay, some of the casualties will be by musketry, and some will be by heat exhaustion. So the Dragoons had a part in attacking the Point of Woods, and as they did so, they ran into an American colonel from Maryland named Ramsey. And there's an interesting story here that Ramsey's on his horse, a Dragoon comes up to him, Ramsey kills him with a sword. Okay? Another Dragoon comes up to shoot him, and the pistol misfires. Because remember, these are flintlocks. They're not like Colt 45s that you see on Gunsmoke that I watch all the time. A third Dragoon comes up, shoots him in the face. This one hit him. Okay, so he falls off and surrenders, and he's there badly wounded, and he will be captured by the British, and the British General Clinton so respected his bravery that he paroled him and said, "Go home, get better, and we'll exchange you." Now, in those days, parole was important, and it was honorable. When General Lee had been captured at Basking Ridge the year before Monmouth, the British held him in New York City until they got tired of him, basically. And there's a long story of General Lee. I give a talk on him every year. But Lee was really conceited and thought he ought to be exchanged or traded for General Johnny Burgoyne, who was commander of the British troops at Saratoga. But they're different ranks. In those days, like 10 privates equal a captain, and 10 captains equal a colonel. And they had a whole rigmarole on how to trade people. So we foolishly sent a group of Marines up to Rhode Island to capture a British General Prescott of equal rank to Lee so he could trade him and get him back. But now the British were so tired of him that they released Lee on parole, ROR, in Philadelphia, and he hung out there for several months until the papers got committed, and then you could go fight again. I mean, if I got captured and released, I'd probably just go home. But the Army, I guess, would know where you are. So anyway, Ramsey got released, and eventually, it takes him 2 years before he gets back into battle. He was wounded so badly by that pistol shot in the head. This is one of the major incidents of the battle. The artist who did the Monmouth Battle Monument in downtown Freehold there's 6 scenes there. One of the scenes is Colonel Ramsey fighting with his sword up, slaying these Dragoon guys. The problem I have with it is that the artist was very fond of looking at Revolutionary War equipment and uniforms and having everybody the monument's going up in 1880, what had happened 100 years earlier. And he said on the Dragoons, they had a skull and crossbones on their cap. Well, as close as I can figure out, the skull and crossbones was on the cap of the 17th Dragoons, not the 16th. But it's a nice try. Okay, so that's the story of the Dragoons at the Point of Woods on map 301. I'll make one more mention of them before we start looking at the main British unit, the Grenadiers. If you go to map 307 on the next page, this is the main British attack around noon on the day of the battle. And you can see from the way the map goes, with the blues is us in the middle, and the reds is them. They're going around both ends of us. The lower end is being led by the Light Dragoons, and the 16th Light Dragoons, when they took part in this attack, received a couple volleys from the American troops that were nearby and fell back. One of the few times in the battle that a British unit was defeated in an attack. So bottom line here is the 16th Dragoons did not do good in this battle. They got ambushed in the morning, and they did do okay at the Point of Woods in the attack I just mentioned with Colonel Ramsey, but in the main attack at 12, they also got driven back. But that's what happened. Okay. So now let us switch gears again to talk about Grenadiers. You need to go to speed. Now, Grenadiers are cool. These are the big guys to begin with. They're big so they can throw grenades, although the grenades are not part of their equipment now. And they also have these beaver hats, the buskin hats that you see when you look at Buckingham Palace and the changing of the guard. These are the big guys. And I guess when it comes to it, Trevor, I don't know if you'd agree with me, they're more famous than the Black Watch. Are they the most famous unit in the British Army, the Grenadiers? Now, the Grenadiers, thank you, didn't mean you put down spot, Trevor. Remember that I mentioned that British line regiments had 10 companies. One company was light infantry, and those were all detached. One company was Grenadiers, and those were all attached. So at the time of Monmouth, they will have 2 battalions of Grenadiers, although each tended to keep its own identity. So the Grenadiers company from the 42nd Regiment would be fighting next to the Grenadiers company from the 33rd Regiment. But they had fought together enough to be able to work together. And they're in Cornwallis's division, which is the main British division. They had 2 Nifausen's 1st Division was mostly German troops. The core of the British Army was in Cornwallis's division. This is the same guy, by the way, that will be captured at Yorktown. Yay, we won that one. And his statue is actually in Westminster Abbey in London because of what he accomplished in India after the war, in a later war. Now, the Grenadiers will be in that attack on the Point of Woods on map 301. And what's interesting is that as they come forward, they are ambushed by General Wayne from Point of Woods, and the Americans who are in that woods got away, except for Colonel Ramsey. And then the Grenadiers and Guards will continue their attack, as is happening on map 307. And in this attack, the Grenadiers are the center of the attack, and you can see the 1st Battalion on the right and the 2nd on the left, with the Dragoons on the lower part, and then the Guards will be up the upper part. We'll talk about that in a moment. As the Grenadiers are coming into action, they are in march formation. Now, I don't know if any of you here are reenactors. I have been one. March formation is usually 4 men wide. And they're not coming down a road, you move faster that way. When you get into battle, they go from that 4-man wide marching column into a battle line, 2 people deep. And it's a complicated maneuver and takes some time, especially if you're under fire. So as the Grenadiers are moving to attack the center of the American line at the hedgerow, General Clinton is riding around with his sword, envoys, and he was criticized after the battle by his own officers for riding around like a Newmarket jockey. Okay. Jockeys are commoners, and bear in mind that generals are upper class, most officers are upper class, most soldiers are lower class, not as low as I guess the seamen, but we won't get into Navy stuff. And that the British officers felt more kinship with the American officers than they did with their own privates. Okay. So he's riding around like a Newmarket jockey, and then as the Grenadiers get within shouting distance of the American line, he yells out, "Charge, Grenadiers, never mind forming." So what they did is they lowered their muskets with their bayonets and they charged while still in column formation. Okay, that got them there quicker. The American troops got off maybe 3 rounds before they broke. And the advantage, actually this turned out to be the British advantage, because if they had stopped and formed in a line, they would have had a broad front that was vulnerable to the American cannons that were there. By just running at the charge, they had an open formation and they took less casualties than they would have otherwise. So it actually turned out to be a good thing, even though it wasn't very smart. It's like, going on, you have, 4th and 8 in the football games. I watched that yesterday, and you go for it rather than punting is what you should have done. So the Grenadiers are charging, the American line breaks, and the British then will rush along the road. I have it marked there, 522 over on the right, and then it goes off to what's called the West Monmouth up in the upper left corner. And you go to map 311. This is a detail there of the West Monmouth Bridge down in the lower right. And the Grenadiers go charging across the bridge. They think they have the Americans on the run. Yay, we won the battle. And when they cross that bridge, you can see them lined up there towards the bottom of the map. Washington has half his army lined up on Pine Hill with 10 cannons. And as soon as the British cross the bridge, the British say, "Oh crap, kaboom, kaboom." And their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Monmouth, gets struck by a great shot and mortally wounded. The British thought they had the battle won. But George Washington made the key decision around 12:30, even though we lost the morning battle, to stay on the battlefield. And while that fight was going on at the point of woods and the hedgerow that I just mentioned, look at that American line upper left. There's a lot of American troops there. Okay, about 6,000. The Grenadiers, at least the 2nd Grenadiers, might have maybe 200 men at this point. They take heavy casualties. Lieutenant Hale of the 2nd Grenadiers wrote, "We rushed on amidst the heaviest fire I've ever felt. It was no longer a contest for bringing up our companies in order. All the officers, as all the men could do, ran in the foremost." Monckton yelled out, "Into the fray, forward to the charge, my brave Grenadiers," before he got shot and left on the field. They will withdraw back below the stream at the bottom of the page. And later in the battle, as there was a draw going on, a British delegation went out to try and retrieve the body, and they didn't. Some troops, American troops from Pennsylvania, picked him up, took him to Old Tennant Hospital, Old Tennant Church, which is being used as a hospital. It's still standing on the edge of the battlefield. He died the next day and was buried there, and is still there now with a marker. British Lieutenant Colonel, the highest one, killed in the battle from the 2nd Grenadiers, is buried next to Tennant Church. When they took the body away, some of the troops pilfered his flag and his sword, which ended up in private collections in Pennsylvania, till eventually they got donated back to Monmouth County Historical Association. And you can still go to that museum. I think they're open on Sundays now, but I know they're open during the week, and see his flag, personal flag, it's not a British unit flag, and his sword of this highest British commander from the 2nd Grenadiers that was killed in the battle because they made this rush thinking the battle had been won, and it wasn't.
How many cannons did Washington have?
The Army had around 25. There'll be around 12, 10 to 12 on Perrine Hill. A lot of the cannons in the morning were out of ammunition or beat up. Cannons would get beat up in those days because just the wheels would break, to be honest. And after every battle, they had to repair the cannons. Some of them had to get sent back to the main American Cannon Forge, which was at Carlisle, Pennsylvania. But each side had about 20 cannons, but no more than 10 or 12 were engaged at a time. Okay, so that's the story of the Grenadiers. Oh, sorry, one more story. Late in the day, when the British decided they weren't going to be able to win the battle, they withdrew from the battlefield. And this goes back to map 334 that we saw earlier with the 42nd Black Watch, where you can see on the right a whole line of British troops withdrawing to the back. And included in this will be the Grenadiers in this general British withdrawal late in the day of the battle. Now, as they withdrew, if you look at the map for 343, which is the last one. I hope these maps aren't, I don't know if these maps are too detailed, or do they help you understand the flow of what I'm talking about? Okay, because this is a lot of detail by being a military historian, so I appreciate your showing up and listening. If you go away with just an appreciation for what the main units were here, and that none of these famous British units won the battle, because the British didn't win the battle. It was a draw. So what happened later in the battle is the 1st Grenadiers was leading the withdrawal, and they're going to be coming down Wemrock Road, which is over at the right. It says lane to Wyckoff's house, but it's modern Wemrock Road. And as they're marching down that road towards their withdrawal, they want to go over to Route 9, where the fast food restaurants are. General Wayne sees them. Now, this is an interesting story. Man Anthony Wayne, I'll be giving a talk on him next year. He's not mad. He got mad fighting Indians in 1794, but he is impetuous. And he sees the British withdrawing, and he goes to General Washington and says, "Sir, we ought to counterattack them while they're at the disadvantage." Washington says, "No, we are too beat up." So Wayne says, "Give me a couple thousand men and I'll go beat them up." And he says, "No." So Wayne gets like 300 men that Washington loans him to see what's going on. So at the top of map 343, you see Wayne with the 3rd Pennsylvania Brigade is coming across the battlefield. And as he comes across the battlefield, he sees the 1st Grenadiers down in the lower right, who are marching away with the British troops. Now, what should Wayne have done? Oh, I see the Grenadiers marching away. Let's go tell General Washington. Is that what he did? No, that makes too much sense. Oh, there's the Grenadiers. Let's go attack them. What? So he attacks with the Pennsylvania Brigade on the Grenadiers. Grenadiers didn't like that. Okay. More so, the Grenadiers didn't like being attacked, and says Wayne attacks down here at the bottom, and off the bottom of the map, the 2nd Grenadiers had already gone into camp and was fixing their dinner over by Battlefield Orchards on Wemrock Road. And they got called up, and they were pissed because they hadn't eaten all day, and they're having dinner, and as Americans don't know when to quit, they're keeping the battle going. So the 1st Grenadiers, which got ambushed by Wayne, the 2nd Grenadiers chased Wayne back across the battlefield, and General Clinton shows up and says, "We're going to deal with those Americans like they deserve." And he has a fresh regiment, the 33rd Regiment. So you have 3 regiments attacking Wayne's position there on the left of the map near what they call the parsonage. Wayne should have withdrawn all the way back to the main American line. He didn't. He made a stand at the parsonage. Nutso, but it worked. Why did it work? Because when the 33rd Regiment and the Grenadiers formed to attack, and what's cool with this, there's a diorama here in the museum when you go down towards the drinking fountain in the bathroom, shows this attack. Wayne's men will be there at the parsonage, lined up, and there'll be the British lined up to attack them. In the British attack, they said they received heavy fire from Americans that were in the parsonage barn and house, and you can see that plainly in the diorama of the hall. Why did the British give up? They should have smashed Wayne because they're taking flank fire. Now, flank fire is coming in from the side. when you line up and attack an enemy cannons head on, they can shoot at you. Sometimes they'll be short, sometimes they'll be long, sometimes they'll hit your line, but they'll just take out a little section of it. When you're shooting by a flank or enfilade fire, supposedly you can hit the whole line, and there's one story that one British cannon shot knocked the muskets out of 20 British soldiers because it came in from the side. You don't want to suffer from flank fire. What happens while the British are lined up there in front of the parsonage, there's artillery fire coming in from their right, the American cannons up on Prime Hill, and there's cannon fire coming in from the cannons that are here on Holmes's Hill. So they're getting flank fire from both ends. Now what's interesting is here the cannons could not see the British. But they knew where they were because they could hear them and see the smoke of just over that first ridge. So they were actually shooting their cannonballs, and the cannonballs would go to the top of the ridge and then bounce down the other side. And it worked. The British were taking flank fire from both ends, and they said, the heck with this, and they withdrew.
Was it grape shot or just round?
Round shot. Grape shot's only good for like 300 yards. Which was the maximum distance from Prime Hill to the orchard where the Black Watch was. Okay, here they're shooting, and when Monckton was killed, it was great because he was closer to the line. Here they're going to have to use a round shot. So the Grenadiers all withdrew back to Route 9 on the other side of what's called the Division Road, and went into camp by dark and lit their fires. And during the night, they kept the fires going, and the British all left because they didn't want to play no more. And Washington was ready to pick up the battle the next day, but the British were gone. Now, what I have done is I skipped over what the Guards were. The Guards are cool because they're still around today. They didn't do much. I left them for last. The 1st Regiment of Foot Guards is the oldest regiment in the British Army that's still continuously around from 1660. It was capped. What's neat with the Guards, they didn't do much here at Monmouth. They were involved in the attack on the hedgerow, which is map 301. The Guards Brigade, it's in 2 battalions. And that was their most significant part, as it was the only hand-to-hand fighting in the battle. What's interesting on the next map on 307, the Guards are on the top end of the British attack, and they'll be attacking the New Jersey Brigade. Now, New Jersey Brigade had 4 regiments. They were assigned to hold a section of fence line between Route 522 at the center of the map and Spotswood Middle Brook farther up, except one of the regiments was detached to go and hold a bridge in the back. That leaves you with 3. 2 of the regiments saw the 1st regiment leaving, so they left. They said, we must have missed an order. That means only 1 New Jersey regiment was left to hold that whole line. And when the Guards comes charging across the field, we didn't hold. And that, in a nutshell, is what the New Jersey Brigade didn't do at the battle. They got overrun by the Guards Brigade. The Guards will spend the rest of the battle in reserve and won't be doing much fighting. So I'm just including them as one of the famous British units. That's my summary. I hope it wasn't too detailed. At least you can get a flavor for what's going on here. That the battle is fought by stages, and that there were famous British units here, and you can follow what they did. I guess the biggest success was probably the Grenadiers when they broke the American line at the hedgerow, but then they pushed their advantage too far and ended up getting clobbered by grape shot from American cannons, and they lost their commander. They fought bravely, yes. Again, what's interesting though is some of these regiments, when I wrote my book, I looked them up, went over to Princeton Library to find these British regimental histories, don't even mention the battle. This was just a skirmish to the British. They spent all their time talking about World War I and other battles that these units fought in. To the British, Monmouth was just a small action. Their goal was, after leaving Philadelphia, to march back to New York. Clinton's whole plan was to get up to Staten Island and get there with his 10-mile wagon train intact. And that's what he did. So he will write that up and just say, the Americans attacked us at Monmouth, we fought them to a standstill, and my wagons got away to New York. we win. We won the campaign because we accomplished what we wanted to do. On the American side, we don't very often hold a battlefield after the battle is over. Washington, as a general, only won 4 actions during the war. The sieges at Bunker Hill and Yorktown, the sneak attacks at Princeton and Trenton, and that was basically it. There were some other minor actions around. He lost 7 or 8. And I always joke, if he was manager of the Jets, but the Jets would love to have a record of 4 and 7 right now, wouldn't they? Yes, they would. He would have gotten fired. But he managed to hold on, and that was one of his strengths. But when because we held the battlefield and the British left, it seemed like it was a victory. And more so when Washington's staff member, Alexander Hamilton, who was not his chief of staff, that's what somebody wrote up in one of the recent biographies, and I'll deal with that in my talk in January. But when Alexander Hamilton wrote up Washington's battle report, it sounded like we won. And as important as often happens in history, it's maybe not so much what happened as what people think happened. Yes, what question? Yes.
Where was General Howe during this?
General
Howe.
He had been relieved. He went home. They had a big party for him. He went home before this campaign started, and Clinton took over. And the British went through several Gage, Howe, Clinton, then Cornwallis generals that essentially, like Northern generals in the Civil War, got sacked because nobody was winning. And a problem with why the British, and thank you for the question, he's an EP, high school student with a good question here. Why didn't the British win the revolution? They didn't have enough troops. America's way too big. The British were used to raising troops and beating the heck out of Scotland. Because Scotland's there, it's not very big, it doesn't have a lot of troops, we can beat them up. America is huge. The British could not hold more than 2 major cities at the same time. Boston and New York and Philadelphia, New York and Charleston, even after they hired these German mercenaries to come over and help them. Another reason they didn't win is Washington wouldn't give up, but once it became a world war after France and Holland and Sweden ended the war on our side after Saratoga, the British had more important places like the Spice Islands and India to defend than America. What happened was, the British went broke fighting this war that they weren't going to win. And I often posit, what if Washington almost got hit by a cannonball around 2 o'clock in the afternoon around Grenadiers Hill. He almost got killed when he rode in front of the lines in Princeton. What if Washington had gotten killed during the war? We wouldn't have won the war. We'd now be probably speaking English and be a province or a member of the British Commonwealth like Canada is. But we would have probably broken away from Britain eventually, but we'd still be closely tied to them. It's just very important that we had Washington around. Anyway, the British did not win the war for a number of reasons. One is the size of America, and another reason is we didn't win this battle, but we didn't lose the Battle of Monmouth. If we had lost Monmouth, it might have meant the war because they might have sacked Washington afterwards. A question in the back, yes?
How did the Queen's Rangers fall into this role here?
We have an expert on the Queen's Rangers here. They're riding around, scouting. Basically, neither side had a lot of cavalry. Unlike in the Civil War, you have Jeb Stuart and Nathan Bedford Forrest running around. The Queen's Rangers will be involved in scouting and defending the flanks. They're not involved much in the direct fighting. There aren't that many of them. I don't know what the size of it was.
About 435 in total.
Around 400, but they're going to be split up and doing scouting and protecting the flanks. Same question you might ask about the light infantry. The light infantry, British, was famous. They were good fighters. They had 2 battalions. Clever British, the 1st Battalion and the 2nd Battalion. One of the units was with Knyphausen's division, which marched off the field around 4 in the morning and wasn't even engaged in the fighting. And the other light infantry battalion was with the 42nd up on the north side of the field, hiding in the woods most of the battle. They were not called upon to fight. The Queen's Rangers will be called upon, and they're used. And I could almost do a whole new lecture on them, but that's going to get real detailed, and we're still, and give Trevor a plug here, he's trying to figure out what they did and where. and they were engaged actually the day before the battle, in an important scouting episode. They are here, but that history is yet to be written.
So the Dragoons are also mounted, so they
Yes.
do most of the fighting and the.
They're fighting. Yeah, they're fighting with the units in line. And it's odd to have in that attack on the Point of Woods, Dragoons should be on the ends of the line, on the flanks. They're involved in that attack on the Point of Woods in the middle of the fight. And the reason they're there is so that when the American troops are driven out of the Point of Woods, they can try and capture American soldiers, which they did. They beat up, I killed 3 Dragoons. One got killed by Ramsey, one his gun misfired, the other one hit him, and they captured an American colonel. So they're involved because they're supposed to run down the American troops as they're retreating. But there's just too many infantry around that they didn't succeed at it. So they end up down in the later attack where they actually got repulsed for a minute. But fair question. There are other units here. I am not totally up on the 33rd and the 72nd and the other regiments. Maybe do it in another talk. If people have that kind of interest, let me know afterwards. Or it might be time to at least talk about some of the American regiments other than the New Jersey ones. But they're here, the Queen's Dragoons, on the field, the Queen's Rangers, doing things that cavalry should be doing. And cavalry is lighter armed than even Dragoons. Dragoons, remember, have smaller horses, different kinds of muskets, and they can also be used for scouting, but they're also used, I guess here, as shock troops. And the Americans don't have cavalry on the field, and that's going to be a problem they're going to have throughout the war, other than Light Horse Harry Lee, Robert E. Lee's father, down in Virginia. We don't have cavalry on the field except for some militia cavalry. You need cavalry to scout to see where the bad guys are and then to report back. The offshoot of that is that General Washington will be using his key officers. Von Steuben almost got captured by the Queen's Rangers when he was out scouting. When Hamilton was scouting late in the morning of the battle, his horse got shot. And a friend of him, Lawrence, was the son of the president of Congress, got wounded. That your key officers or whatever are going to be shot down when they're riding around on horseback doing scouting that cavalry ought to be shooting, so that your staff and your general corps is depleted by the end of the battle, because this is a day-long battle which they're not used to. So the use of cavalry in the war in particular is a neat topic. Use of cavalry in this battle is more what didn't they do, but the best cavalry unit active on the field is the Queen's Rangers. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Okay, so with the 42nd, back to them for a second, back up in the north end of the battlefield, what units, if you know, I know we're really trying to talk American units, but who were they looking at, who were they facing off against?
Okay, you're talking about basically map number 334. The 42nd Regiment is the right wing of the British line in that, what Dr. Stone's calling the cider orchard just north of the Sutphen farm. They have 2 battalions. The 1st battalion's in the woods, and the other battalion is going to be just off the top of the map, trying with the light infantry to get around the Americans along Craig Road. That didn't work, so they had to come back and line up behind the woods there in reserve. Who are they facing? They're facing the northern end of the American line, which is Molly Pitcher's cannon. Right. And it's a 4-pounder, which the biggest active cannons are 12s. The British had some 12s. This is the size of the cannonball, but didn't use them that much. 6s are okay. Smaller cannons are easier to maneuver, but the cannonballs aren't very big. You could look at the display here in the museum or the one over in the gift shop. But when they're shooting grape, which was what Proctor was doing, now Proctor's on an elevation, and the 42nd was in the woods. And again, archaeologists have gone in there because the woods isn't there anymore and found the grape shot and found the musket balls and whatever. So what are they facing? Molly Pitcher.
Okay, Pennsylvania units or?
Proctor's artillery is the 4th Pennsylvania artillery. There is some infantry there, but it's behind the line. On the lower part of that line, below where it says Proctor's battalion, There's some infantry, included was Plum Martin's unit, which is along a fence line at the base of the hill. And it still seems odd to me that an infantry unit supporting a battery, you expect it to be behind the battery. But here, they're supporting the battery by being downhill in front of it, and the cannons are shooting over their heads. Again, I appreciate the questions. Again, this is detailed military history stuff. And I hope it's not overwhelming you to hear what these British units were doing, but to understand more fully what's going on in the battle. Again, as I said at the beginning, you need to talk a little less about what Washington and Lee and Lafayette are doing, and include what is Plum Martin doing, because he belongs to you, but what are these units doing? And I haven't gotten to the point to talk about unit commanders. Other than Ramsey and a couple militia commanders, the middle range British officers really aren't doing much, because Clinton is all over the place, Washington's all over the place, giving orders to these units, and they're not making key decisions like Joshua Chamberlain with the 20th Maine and Gettysburg. You don't hear as much about British mid-range officers during this battle. Also, there aren't that many of them. I mean, when you get down to it, I don't know, there may be 20 different British regiments and then a lot of loose ones at the battle. There's not a lot of them here in the first place, because there's only 10 or 12,000 men in each army. They're not, it's a big battle by Revolution standards, not big by Civil War standards. Okay, well, thank you for your attention, for putting up with Molly. Be glad to talk with questions afterwards.